Hello, and welcome to Dissecting Philosophy with Dr. McDonald. In this episode, I'll be reading and discussing the section of the Virtuous in Nietzsche's Thus Spoke Zarathustra, and I also have a discussion of the film Uncle Buck to accompany the section. So let's get started. Of the Virtuous. One has to speak with thunder and heavenly fireworks to feeble and dormant senses. But the voice of beauty speaks softly. It steals into only the most awakened souls. Gently my mirror trembled and laughed to me today. It was beauty's holy laughter and trembling. My beauty laughed at you, you virtuous today, and thus came its voice to me. They want to be paid as well. You want to be paid as well, you virtuous. Do you want reward for virtue, and heaven for earth, and eternity for your today? And are you now angry with me because I teach that there is no reward giver nor paymaster? And truly I do not even teach that virtue is its own reward. Alas, this is my sorrow. Reward and punishment have been lyingly introduced into the fountain of things, and now even into the fountain of your souls, you virtuous. But my words, like the snout of the boar, shall tear up the foundations of your souls. You shall call me a plowshare. All the secrets of your heart shall be brought to light, and when you lie, grubbed up and broken in the sunlight, then your falsehood will be separated from your truth. For this is your truth. You are too pure for the dirt of the words revenge, punishment, reward, retribution. You love your virtue as the mother her child, but when was it heard of a mother wanting to be paid for her love? Your virtue is your dearest self. The ring's desire is in you to attain itself again. Every ring struggles and turns itself to that end. Every work of your virtue is like a star extinguished. Its light is forever traveling. And when will it cease from traveling? Thus the light of your virtue is still traveling, even when its task is done. Though it be forgotten and dead, its beam of light still lives and travels. That your virtue is yourself, and not something alien, a skin, a covering. That is the truth from the bottom of your souls, you virtuous. So here we have Nietzsche again return to the subject of virtue. And in the previous section, in part 1, we've had prior discussions in the sections of the chairs of virtue and of the bestowing virtue, which rounds off part 1. And here it pops up for the first time in part 2. And what initially kicks off the section as well is Nietzsche's discussion about wanting to be paid or rewarded for being virtuous. So it's the whole idea as well, in the sense of when we commit a good action or when we commit something that's charitable or seen by others to be good, then ultimately we want to have that as a form of merit for ourselves. So therefore, the more good we do, the better we will be as a person. And it may seem like quite a strange criticism at first. What is exactly wrong with doing good actions and wanting to be a good person? And let's say the person was a charity worker and devoted their whole life to helping other people. And so the main argument for Nietzsche here that comes out is that it's not really different from that argued by Martin Luther in the 95 Theses, famously written in 1517, against the idea of indulgences in the church. And that's the whole idea that you can somehow buy your way into heaven through the forgiveness of your sin for money. And that's the idea of indulgences that were brought in. And Martin Luther wrote the 95 Thesis in response to that, saying, well, that's not how it works at all. You can't just simply buy your way into heaven. You just simply can't buy forgiveness that's not how it works at all. And no matter how much money you can give someone, that's no way in which your sin can be resolved. And it's a similar argument that Nietzsche has here, in the sense of just because a person commits fantastic actions and they can commit how much ever good for other people, it doesn't necessarily mean to say that what they're ultimately going to do is going to lead them to heaven in the first place. And he goes a bit into the psychology a bit of it as well, in the sense of, well, someone can just be performing these good actions because they think they're going to get away with getting into the best form of the afterlife for themselves. And so there's that whole sort of selfish aspect about it as well. I'm doing the best for me because I'm going to achieve the best form of the afterlife if I do these good deeds. But we could also take the very humorous approach, in the sense of, well, somebody might be thinking they're committing a good deed simply by committing an act of charity every time they pass someone who has one of the little collection boxes and so forth, and they donate every single time. And then you could say from their own mindset, at least, they would say, well, I've done good there, haven't I? Isn't that enough? And well, Nietzsche's saying, well, no, that doesn't work like that at all. In the same sense of indulgences, just by committing that action, sure, it's good, but is it gonna be ultimately a thing that will lead you to salvation at the end of the day? Not really. And it's an interesting characteristic he sets up here of people wanting to commit good actions, is almost like children running around saying, haven't I done good? Therefore, can you not just reward me for having done good? And it's the whole sense of, you have that in a parental relationship, of course, of the children having done whatever it is, done the dishes, washed them, perhaps mowed the lawn. They've done a good action, but it's only they've done it through the whole idea of having a reward at the end of it in the first place. They're only going to have done those dishes just because they expect something out of it. In the same sense of, they're only going to have washed the car, or they're only going to have mowed the lawn just because they expect to be rewarded at the end of it. And it's a fantastic line as well that Nietzsche has. You love your virtue as the mother her child, but when was it heard of a mother wanting to be paid for her love? Beautiful line, in the sense of, when anybody commits a good action, they don't expect any reward or anything back out of it. When the mum does the dishes, then she's just getting the dishes done without any expected reward. Or when she does the laundry and so forth, it's all the sense of getting the job done. And in and of itself, that is a good thing to do, without the then consequence of only doing that just because of expecting a reward. There is no reward. In the sense of, the reward is the clean dishes, the reward is the clean clothes. And then we have another fantastic line, that your virtue is yourself and not something alien, a skin, a covering. That is the truth from the bottom of your souls, you virtuous. So Nietzsche is being critical here of the idea of, when we're virtuous, or when we want to commit a good action or good deed, ultimately we put on a performance and we're not really ourselves. And that's that whole idea of not really believing in what you're doing as an action. You're only performing the action because it's either expected of you that it's a good thing to do, or that you believe that it's the good thing to do. And it's the whole deep level of not really truly believing in what you're actually doing. You're only just going through the motions of it. You have absolutely no conviction in what you're doing. It's a sense as well, if maybe we could use a comic book example here, that whenever a superhero would want to commit a good deed, they have to ultimately put on the outfit before they then can become the virtuous person. So Clark Kent needs to put on the outfit of being Superman. The same thing for Bruce Wayne needing to put on the bat suit in order to be a good person. Same thing for Peter Parker. Every single instance, it needs that whole performance aspect. I can't be a good person unless I wear the suit. And it's the same sense here. As Nietzsche says, well, you can do it in a religious aspect. You can put on the suit of whichever religious outlook it is, but it's not the religion that's making you a good person. It's you at the end of the day. It's you and your actions and your outlook and your mindset. It's not the costume at the end of the day. It's not the fact that it's the bat suit or the Spider-Man outfit or the Superman outfit. Is actually the people themselves who are the good people and not just the symbols. So, in Nietzsche's sense here, there's that classic image, of course, of Nietzsche in the Superman style of outfit with the U across his chest for Übermensch or Overman or Superman. But really, Nietzsche's saying here, well, we don't need the outfits. We don't need that at all, because what ultimately makes us commit great actions is us, and not the ethical model, and not that alien skin covering, is he saying. And it's quite interesting in the sense that he has this whole connection and metaphor between a religious ethical model for our actions is like a skin that ultimately we need to put on in order to be a good individual that commits good deeds. But Nietzsche's ultimately saying, well, no, we don't need the skin. We don't need this outfit. We don't need this model. What's the thing that's behind doing the good deeds is not the model, but you. And then following on the next little bit, he builds up the idea here that virtue is not something that's pure and absolute, but everyone has their own idea of virtue. So let's continue on then. But there are indeed those to whom virtue is a writhing under the whip, and you have listened too much to their cries. And with others, their vices grow lazy, and they call that virtue. And once their hatred and jealousy stretch themselves to resist, their justice becomes lively and rubs its sleepy eyes. And there are others who are drawn downward, their devil draws them. But the more they sink, the more brightly shines their eye and the longing for their God. Alas, their cry too has come to your ears, you virtuous. What I am not, that to me is God and virtue. And there are others who go along, heavy and creaking, like carts carrying stones downhill. They speak much of dignity and virtue. Their break they call virtue. And there are others who are like household clocks, wound up. They repeat their tick-tock and want people to call tick-tock virtue. Truly, I have fun with these. Whenever I find such clocks, I shall wind them up with my mockery, let them chime as well as tick. And others are proud of their handful of righteousness, and for its sake commit wanton outrage upon all things, so that the world is drowned in their unrighteousness. Alas, how ill the word virtue sounds in their mouths, and when they say, I am just, it always sounds like, I am revenged. They want to scratch out the eyes of their enemies with their virtue, and they raise themselves only in order to lower others. And again, there are those who sit in their swamp and speak thus from the rushes. Virtue, that means to sit quietly in the swamp. We bite nobody and avoid him who wants to bite, and in everything we hold the opinion that is given us. And again, there are those who like posing and think. Virtue is a sort of pose. Their knees are always worshipping, and their hands are glorifications of virtue, but their heart knows nothing of it. And again, there are those who hold it a virtue to say virtue is necessary, but fundamentally they believe only that the police are necessary. And many a one who cannot see the sublime in man calls it virtue, that he can see his baseness all too closely. Thus he calls his evil eye virtue. And some want to be edified, and raised up and call it virtue, and others want to be thrown down and call it virtue too. And in that way, almost everyone firmly believes he is participating in virtue, and at least asserts he is an expert on good and evil. And so we have Nietzsche describe various different ideas, what people like to call what virtue and being virtuous is. Just like, for example, he gives there, if someone's lazy, then ultimately they're going to call their own laziness virtue. Or if we only see the worst in other people, then ultimately he's going to say they're going to call that evil eye that they have, that ability to always see the worst in others, virtuous. And so we just have this section where it talks about lots of different ideas of virtue. And it contrasts against the whole idea of virtue being something pure and something absolute, but it's something that's much more based upon the individual and their own psychological makeup in each given instance, rather than upon the actual model itself. And it's the person themselves will then invent what's good and bad based upon their own makeup. And we have an interesting discussion that's very brief there about saying how belief and almost faith is a performance, but they don't truly believe in what they're doing. It's coming up again here as an idea. It's that quote, their knees are always worshipping and their hands are glorifications of virtue, but their heart knows nothing of it. It's the whole sense of if someone comes from a religious background and let's say that their family is incredibly religious, then comes a really awkward and horrible situation for the person that's not very religious within that family. And so rather than make themselves look bad to the family for not having the conviction and belief and faith that everybody else does, they just go along with it, but they don't truly believe in their own hearts. And so it's an interesting line that contemporary philosopher Slavoj Žižek says as well, that faith and belief in itself is just a performance these days, and people would rather just perform the act that they do believe rather than actually truly believe in themselves. It's a belief in belief, as Zizek says there. And so Nietzsche rounds off this section, given his model for exactly what a virtuous individual is going to be. So wrapping up this section, but Zarathustra has not come to say to all these liars and fools, what do you know of virtue? What could you know of virtue? No, he has come that you, my friends, might grow weary of the old words you have learned from the fools and liars, that you might grow weary of the words reward, retribution, punishment, righteous revenge, that you might grow weary of the saying, an action is good when it is unselfish. Ah, my friends, let yourself be in the action, as the mother is in the child, let that be your maxim of virtue. Truly, I have taken 100 maxims, and your virtue's dearest playthings away from you, and you scold me now, as children scold. They were playing on the seashore, then came a wave, and swept away their playthings into the deep, and now they cry. But the same wave shall bring them new playthings, and pour out new coloured seashells before them. Thus they will be consoled, and you too, my friends, shall like them. Have your consolations, and new coloured seashells. Thus spoke Zarathustra. So wrapping up this section then, we have Nietzsche give his model basically for how do we commit good ethical actions. What exactly is that model? Is motherhood, which is incredible to think as well that we suddenly have Nietzsche advocating motherhood as the basis for our ethical actions, and to be a virtuous individual is to be like a mother caring for her children. Because prior to that, of course, in part 1, we had the incredibly sexist and arguably misogynistic views of women that he had in the sections of the friend, of old and young women, of marriage and children. But suddenly here we have the incredible point that he makes for motherhood. And we have the whole idea of who we are as an individual and as a person is built up from the parental care and love ultimately that we have as children. Then we come into a really interesting idea about Nietzsche and parenting here, and how do you raise a good ethical child? Which Nietzsche doesn't give you the answer to that, of course. Because that's Nietzsche's whole point, is to say, well, I'm not going to give you the answer to that because it's going to be left up for people themselves to figure this out for themselves. And it works against the grain, of course, of traditionally in philosophy, where you have someone give you the whole model about what you should do. But Nietzsche's much more open, of course, and leaves the door open for people to have their own ideas about it. But we do get the sense of what Nietzsche's meaning as well, is that when we pour our love and affection and care into the children that we're raising, ultimately you pour your whole self into that. And what you have is not only a reflection of you genetically, but also you as a person as well is going to be reflected in what the child's going to have learned through their upbringing, of course. And Nietzsche's saying, well, in the parental whole idea of things, do people just raise children and then at the end of it expect a reward of heaven? No, you do it because you love your child. And it's in the sense of that working against the Christian idea as well, of you're just pouring this whole love in, and it's a whole unconscious level here as well, you could say, of you as a person, you as an individual through your love and care, and then not expecting any reward from that. Your reward is your child and their own personality as well. And then, of course, the fantastic clashes that you can have with your own children and allowing them to develop their own personality out with your influence and your ideas about things. And so we have this really beautiful image at the end that wraps it up of ideas being swept out like seashells. It's okay to let things go. It's quite a deep idea as well to say, why do we have to hold on to these old things? Why do we have to treasure certain ideas here? Just let them go. If you just let them go, it's okay. It's absolutely fine, because what will happen is, of course, they'll get replaced and then new things will come. And then those new things, he says, they'll be lovely and new colored seashells. And you can't expect those new colored seashells to take the place of the old ones if you don't let the old ones go in the first place. So a great movie, I thought, for this section is Uncle Buck from 1989, which is written and directed by John Hughes. So here's the plot from the Wikipedia page. Bob and Cindy Russell and their 3 children, 15-year-old Tia, 8-year-old Miles, and 6-year-old Maisie, have recently moved from Indianapolis to the Chicago suburbs due to Bob's promotion. Late one night, they receive a phone call from a relative in Indianapolis informing them that Cindy's father has had a heart attack. They make plans to leave immediately to be with him. After hearing the news, Tia, bitter about having been forced to move, accuses Cindy of abandoning her father. Bob suggests asking his brother Buck to come and watch the children, to which Cindy objects. They are middle-class suburbanites, whereas Buck is unemployed. He lives in a small apartment in Chicago, drinks, smokes cigars, and earns his living by betting on rigged horse races. He drives a dilapidated 1977 Mercury Marquis Brougham coupe that pours smoke and backfires. His girlfriend Shanice owns an automobile tire shop. Buck and Shanice have been together for 8 years. She wants to get married and start a family, and Buck has begrudgingly accepted a new job at her shop. Since the Nevilles are out of town, Bob and Cindy have no choice but to turn to Buck. Buck cheerfully informs Shanice that he cannot start his job yet due to the family emergency. Shanice thinks Buck is trying as usual. to lie his way out of working. Upon arriving, Buck quickly befriends Miles and Maisie, but the rebellious Tia is aloof, and the two engage in a battle of wills. When Buck meets Tia's obnoxious boyfriend, Bug, he warns her that Bug is only interested in her for sex. Buck repeatedly thwarts her plans to sneak away on dates with Bug. Over the next several days, he deals with a number of situations in comedic fashion, including taking the kids to his favorite bowling alley, making enormous pancakes for Miles's birthday, ejecting a drunk birthday clown from the property, berating the school assistant principal about her being overly strict about Maisie's behavior in class, and handling the laundry when the washing machine doesn't work. Eventually, Tia exacts revenge on Buck for meddling in her relationship with Bug. She causes Shanice to think Buck is cheating on her with their neighbor Marcy. The next day, Shanice comes over to confront Buck about what she heard, which leads to the couple having an argument and Shanice leaving him. The following weekend, concerned after Tia sneaks out to a party, Buck decides to go looking for her rather than attend a horse race, which would provide him with enough money for the entire following year. He calls and begs Shanice to watch Miles and Maisie as he searches for Tia, and at the party, thinking Bug is taking advantage of her in a bedroom, he forces the door open by drilling out a lock, but walks in on Bug with another girl. After he finds Tia wandering the streets, she tearfully apologizes to him and acknowledges he was right about Bug. Buck reveals Bug bound and gagged with duct tape in the trunk of his car. Buck lets Bug out of the trunk to apologize to her, and when Bug is finally released, he threatens to sue Buck. Buck then strikes him with a few golf balls, making him retract his apology and flee. At home, Tia helps Buck reconcile with Shanice by admitting her lie and tells Shanice that Buck would be a good husband and father. Buck also agrees to start his job at the garage. Bob and Cindy return home from Indianapolis as Cindy's father has recovered. Upon entering the house, Tia surprises her mother with a hug. Buck and Shanice then leave for Chicago, with Buck and Tia exchanging a loving goodbye wave. So what's so great about Uncle Buck as well, we can get the whole idea here of the importance of parenting. Of course, it doesn't just have to be in the sense of a mother or father. It could also be in the sense of a relative having to take care of the children as well. But this also re-emphasizes the point Nietzsche is trying to make here. And what's so good about the film as well is we have Buck in his initial state. Like it says, he makes his living betting on rigged horse races, he smokes, he drinks. His life is basically completely in disarray. And of course, then you have his girlfriend Shanice, who wants some form of stability and for him to get a job and for them to have a family. And so when you have then Buck take care of the kids in the movie, is him then starting to become a better person through accepting that responsibility and the challenges of parenting and taking care of the kids through the movie, of course in very comical ways. And it's the whole fish out of water idea as well, when somebody is completely over and above their heads, but they ultimately try to make the best of the situation and do the best by the kids in each given circumstance. And then you have then that whole idea of character development from Buck at the start of the movie to then Buck at the end of the movie, who's then suddenly, through his looking after the kids, then becomes husband material. And you can clearly see by the end of the movie, he'd be absolutely fine marrying Shanice and taking care of kids of his own. So that then backs up what Nietzsche's saying as well for parenthood and the whole idea of responsibility in caring for children allows us to develop as individuals, all in a way that we don't actually seek a reward for our actions and what we're doing. The whole care about, of course, is just caring for the children, but in doing so, you develop as an individual as well as allowing for the children to develop at the same time. So we have a nice reciprocal relationship that happens. So I very much highly recommend giving Uncle Buck a watch. It's a really great wee film. Many thanks for listening to the episode. I hope you enjoyed my discussion of the section of the Virtuous in Nietzsche's Thus Spoke Zarathustra. Feel free to have a look at the show's Patreon page at patreon.com/dissecting philosophy. And we have various different tier rewards as well. Just for $1, you get your name added to the list of supporters in the description of the episode, a copy of each episode's notes, and you also get to vote on for what I should read and discuss next. And for $3, you get all those rewards again, but you also get access to my Patreon-only Discord chat, where I'll be popping in from time to time to have a wee discussion with everyone. And then for $5, you get early access to the episodes as well as all the previous awards as well. So as soon as I've managed to finish an episode, it'll be automatically available. Also, feel free to drop me an email at my address, dissectingphilosophy@gmail.com, and I can also be found on Twitter at @IamARubberman. Many thanks for listening, and I'll hope you'll join me next time.